Hello, this is Dr. Vance. In this video, I will be modeling critical reading for the text Mirror for Man by Clyde Kluckhohn. The idea here is that you can see through my perspective and instructor's perspective of what to annotate and what to look for in a text like this. So let's get right to it. Here we go, Mirror for Man. This one happens to be just typed out. It's a standard 2-page prompt, somewhere thereabouts. So you know what to do in order to start such an exam. You look at your title, you look at the author. Sometimes there is an introductory little paragraph here that you can take a look at. So in this case, we know a little bit about the author, Clyde Kluckhohn, 1905 to 1960. This was adapted from this book, Mirror for Man. He was an anthropologist. So already here we have a possibility for a compare and contrast based on the year. You know, what was it like before 1960? What like? Well, we don't know yet. We don't know what this is exactly going to be about, but we already have a clue of what we could do. So let's start reading through this then. One of the interesting things about human beings is that they try to understand themselves and their own behavior. Okay. While this has been particularly true of Europeans in recent times, there is no group which has not developed a scheme or schemes to explain human actions. Okay, that seems like a statement to me that I want to highlight. To the insistent human query why, the most exciting illumination anthropology has to offer is that of the concept of culture. So here, and I'm going to put in a comment right here, so introduction of a new term, culture, probably is going to define what it means, and then we have this other idea here about the scheme or schemes to explain human actions. Well, I don't know if that is what he means by culture, but perhaps so. Why do so many Chinese dislike milk and milk products? So, one way that I really like to read is I like to put in comments in terms of rhetorical techniques or writing techniques. I like to look for content, rhetorical or writing techniques. And then the third component, I really like to see if I have any connections to the text myself. So I'm trying to notice these three areas, basically, whenever I'm reading through something. So the content I just will put down and mark down as a claim or whatnot. Rhetorical or writing techniques, maybe I'll put those in parentheses. And connections I might put in brackets. That way I don't get confused later on if I'm rereading my annotations and I notice something and I think, oh, well, did the author say that? No, I said that. I wrote that in the margins. So in this case, I'm going to just remark about rhetorical questions in my own shorthand here. So we have a bunch of rhetorical questions. Right? Why during World War II did Japanese soldiers die willingly in a banzai charge? Why do some nations trace descent through the father, others through the mother, still others through both parents? So, rhetorical questions can be a really great device, especially to transition from one idea to the next. Your high school teacher may have commented about rhetorical questions basically because of the overuse of them. He or she may have been tired of receiving papers where they had 15 rhetorical questions in them and none of them were eventually answered. However, they are pretty good techniques, as you can see. So here we have the answer then. not because different people have different instincts, not because they were destined by God or fate to different habits, not because the weather is different in China or Japan, and Japan in the United States. Sometimes shrewd common sense has the answer, because they were brought up that way. Okay, so finally, we have a definition. Let's put this in. So, up here, the rhetorical questions. Essentially, why are people different across the world? Here we have the official definition of culture, which is, what is it? Let's see. Let's put this in quotes because we may want to use it later. The social legacy individuals acquire from their group. So that's a pretty good definition. And I think he goes on right here to elaborate on that as well. Let's take a look. This technical term has a wider meaning than the culture of history and literature. A humble cooking pot is as much a cultural product as a Beethoven sonata. This let's make this a new line, maybe it's a claim. This anthropological version of culture or definition is more expansive. It is not our idea of going to the symphony. Something like that. And maybe at this point, maybe I have a connection to something. Maybe I had one time an aunt or an uncle who talked about being cultured with my aunt and uncle. So they thought being cultured was knowing how to eat properly and use both a knife and fork at the same time. Otherwise, you would be accused of eating like an animal. You know, something like that. Or being cultured in the traditional sense of knowing about Shakespeare or going to the symphony or something like that. So this is in direct contrast to that idea. So that's kind of interesting. In ordinary speech, people of culture are those who speak languages other than their own, who are familiar with history, literature, philosophy, or the fine arts. To the anthropologist, however, to be human is to be cultured. So this is an important part. To be human means to be cultured. Okay. So this is an interesting prompt because it starts out, we have a number of rhetorical questions over here. We have this idea of explaining the differences among people. And then we have an elaborate definition. So some prompts like this will start out and have an argument by definition. There is culture in general, and then there are the specific cultures such as Russian, American, British, Hottentot, Inca. The general abstract notion serves to remind us that we cannot explain acts solely in terms of the biological properties of the people concerned. Okay, so now we're getting into something else. Let's put this in. So, biology cannot explain entirely the differences among the peoples. So, he seems to be setting up something in terms of culture versus biology. The initial setup here, but I'm not sure yet where he's going with this. The past experience of other people in the form of culture enters into almost every event. Each specific culture constitutes a kind of blueprint of life's activities. That seems like a claim to me. So we're going to put that in. Each culture acts like a blueprint for life's activities. Okay. A good deal of human behavior can be understood and indeed predicted if we know a people's design for living. Many acts are neither accidental nor due to personal peculiarities, nor caused by supernatural forces, nor simply mysterious. Okay, so this looks like a claim. Some people would call it a topic sentence. So, culture, how about human behavior, can be predicted if we know someone's cultural background, something like that. Okay, and then we have lots of examples here, right? Good support for this claim. Even we Americans who pride ourselves on our individualism follow most of the time a pattern not of our own making. We brush our teeth on arising, we put on pants, not a loincloth or a grass skirt. We eat 3 meals a day, not 4 or 5 or 2. We sleep in a bed, not in a hammock. So all of this stuff right here, these are examples of differences in culture, differences in, how about habits based on culture, how we are raised. Okay, and then we move into another example of plural wives. To the American woman, a system of plural wives seems instinctively abhorrent. Right, so this right here seems to be another example of this. She cannot understand how any woman can fail to be jealous and uncomfortable if she must share her husband with other women. She feels it unnatural to accept such a situation. On the other hand, a Koryak woman of Siberia, for example, would find it hard to understand how a woman could be so selfish and so undesirous of feminine companionship in the home as to wish to restrict her husband to one mate. So we have this example here. We have the example of plural wives. And then look here. This seems to be another example. Well, let's see if it is. Some years ago, I met in New York City, a young man who did not speak a word of English and was obviously bewildered by American ways. By blood, he was American, for his parents had gone from Indiana to China as missionaries. Orphaned in infancy, he was reared by a Chinese family in a remote village. All who met him found him more Chinese than American. The facts of his blue eyes and light hair were less impressive than a Chinese style of gait, Chinese arm and hand movements, Chinese facial expression, and Chinese modes of thought. The biological heritage was American, but the cultural training had been Chinese. So, what are we going to mark down? Here, this happens to be an example of the orphan in what kind of orphan? American raised as a Chinese person. And there's a claim here because it shows how biological heritage is informed by cultural training. So, I like this essay a lot because it shows a lot of material that you have to imply from the text, because this is primarily an example-driven prompt. It starts out up here with definition, rhetorical questions, so getting to the heart of what constitutes the differences among the world's peoples. So it has this definition of what culture is, and many prompts will do that. They will introduce a term and then try to define it or problematize it. And then we move into this central section that has a lot of different examples. And look, another example right here. Another example of this kind. So let's mark this down. Example of what? Let's read it. I once knew a trader's wife in Arizona who took a somewhat devilish interest in producing a cultural reaction. Guests who came her way were often served delicious sandwiches filled with a meat that seemed to be neither chicken nor tuna fish, yet was reminiscent of both. To queries she gave no reply until each had eaten his or her fill. Then she explained that what they had eaten was not chicken, not tuna fish, but the rich white flesh of a freshly killed rattlesnake, which is actually, it tastes pretty good. The response was instantaneous, often violent vomiting. A biological process was caught in a cultural web. Okay, so there's two things I think going on here. First, we have the example of the rattlesnake and the cultural reaction. Then we have really another claim that biology can be influenced by culture via the rattlesnake example. Okay, what else can we allude to right here? Well, we could think about our own connections to this. Have you ever eaten any strange food? I've had alligator and frog legs and whatnot. I once ate horse when I was in Italy. They seem to like to eat horses a lot. Something strange. I might put that in just as a reference. Horse or donkey eating example. I don't know if I'm going to want to use this as a possible writing topic later on, but the thing is, you want to be efficient students, and that means when you're going through a prompt like this, you want to take really good notes if you can. So if you have a thought that occurs to you, you want to write that down and note it. It becomes your memory cue or clue for later on, because if you have to write a paper on this in a week or 2 weeks or something, you don't want to have to reread the entire thing. You want to say, oh yeah, I remember, yeah, there was this example, this connection. This becomes particularly true if you make a connection to something that you've read. Have you read anything about biology? Oh, I could say, yes, there was that Time magazine article from whenever you remember it being, and that was on biology, or better yet, nature versus nurture. So then you have material to work with. Many students ask, how do I come up with examples? What is something good? Well, you come up with examples partly by critically reading and going through, and while you're reading this, you try to think of connections. This is what instructors really mean by critically reading. It's engaging with the text in some substantive way. And it means that you're not simply trying to find out what did the text say, you are also looking to see how did the text say it. And that way you can incorporate some of these elements in your own work. I mean, that's some of the best ways, I think, that you will become better writers is by paying attention to how the writing is actually being done. Okay, so last paragraph then. Let's see what happens here. Usually an author will try to tie things together, not always, but let's see if Clyde Kluckhohn is nice to us here. All this does not mean that there is no such thing as raw human nature. Okay. The members of all human groups have about the same biological equipment. Okay, that seems new. All people undergo the same poignant life experience, such as birth, helplessness, illness, old age, and death. Okay, so there's a lot that's happening here already. So claim. same biological equipment. And this is another claim. We undergo the same life events. What are these life events? Birth, helplessness, illness, old age, death. Okay, I'm going to indent these because that's where they really belong. That's as far as it'll let me go. The biological potentialities of the species are blocks with which cultures are built. Okay, so this is a really dense paragraph. Normally I don't like to highlight very much. I want to highlight only main points, and you can see there's a lot of area here that is not highlighted because it's essentially example. But there's a lot in this paragraph. So claim biology allows for a certain potential for the species, but culture helps organize these into, let's use a quote from him, building blocks by which our lives are organized, something like that. And then here, some patterns of every culture crystallize around focuses provided biology. And then an example of that, the difference between the sexes, the presence of persons of different ages, the varying physical strength and skill of individuals. The facts of nature also limit culture forms. Nature also limits cultural forms. That's a pretty cool idea. No culture provides a pattern for jumping over trees or for eating iron ore. There's thus no either or between nature and that special form of nature called nurture. The two factors are interdependent. Yeah, so another claim right here. Biology and culture are interdependent. So in Kluckhohn's prompt, unlike many other prompts, most of the points actually are in this paragraph. This is by far the most important paragraph of the prompt. So what exactly does all this stuff mean, right? So this is where we have to reread this paragraph maybe a couple times to make sure that we understand that he's claiming that people are pretty much genetically and biologically the same. We undergo the same major life issues, right? We are born, we age, right? There's no eternal life or anything like that. So we have some of the signposts in life that we eventually reach. That there's this claim, biology allows for a certain potential, right? And culture helps organize these into building blocks. Nature limits these cultural forms, and biology and culture are interdependent. So everything is right here. Maybe we want to come up with our own example, right? I've traveled to Europe some, and the Europeans definitely have a different way of eating. They may skip breakfast. They're not big breakfast fans, at least the places I've been to. So I'm going to put this down. Europeans not have a different method of eating. If you've been to certain restaurants that specialize in African cuisine, there's eating with the hands. So African cuisine, eating with the hands, things like that. That might be an example that I could then allude to if I need to write about this. The last thing I want to talk about here is the writing and rhetorical features. I've mentioned the rhetorical features some with rhetorical questions and whatnot. So writing features or writing strategies, those constitute how something was written. And this is primarily an example-driven essay. Right? We have examples throughout here. So he may come up with a claim, and then we have example for that. More example with the Koryak woman and so forth. And then here we have a classification pattern, right? So these are the major claims, and for instance, these are the smaller components to these poignant life experiences. That would be classification. That's what that means. It is very, very helpful to review the different writing and rhetorical strategies. That way you can recognize these and take a look at them. I like to, at points, use a different font to point these out. I'm sorry, a different highlight to point these out. It might be helpful, or you can come up with your own system. But this is a basic reading for Mirror for Man, and this is, as an instructor, what I look for when I'm going through a text like this. In some of the other videos that you'll see, it will talk about some of the other processes of how to respond to this. So thank you for your time.